Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Wahlberg from NASA at Kennedy Space Center. I work in the Project Integration Division of the ISS and Spacecraft Processing Directorate. Next slide. My agenda today, we're going to cover a little bit of the payload processing at KSC, historical and what we expect to continue into the future, and I'll touch on some of the other facilities and resources we have available at KSC. Next slide, please. And next. This flowchart is typical of the KSC launch site processing, but it probably could be used at any launch site. This is based on the years of experience that KSC has, and we plan on continuing that support into the future. The flowchart here begins with arrival at KSC, but actually the processing begins a long time before this. We begin planning months before the payload team's arrival in order that we can both identify and understand your needs and requirements for processing at KSC and making sure that we can fulfill those requirements, and also helping the teams prepare for the final flight processing at KSC. We have supported diverse areas of research as depicted by some of the pictures there. The research, when you're ready to ship to KSC, our logistics team can provide help with that. If you're coming in from overseas, we have customs contacts with the local airports in the state to help bring you into the States. And as part of the pre-planning, if you'll be requiring some laboratories to continue your processing and final preparations, we have laboratories that we will set up for you specific to your needs. Once you arrive, the science gets integrated into the hardware, and the hardware is integrated either for checkout or for testing with interfaces as required, put into a physical configuration for final flight. And then from there, you'll either, if it's stowage, you'll be submitted for bench review and packing. If you have late stow requirements, then the KSC team will work with the payload teams to get that loaded onto the launch vehicles. We provide the transport to the launch vehicle. I think the SpaceX representative mentioned that yesterday. And then from the time that you turn over the late stow hardware to us, and we get it to the vehicle and make sure that everything's interfacing correctly, we are on call with you until actual launch occurs. If for some reason there's a scrub, then we'll be working with you to determine, does the science need to be refurbished before the next scrub launch attempt, and get that back to support the next launch attempt, whenever that is. Once you launch during mission ops, you can continue to stay at KSC if you wish. There's facilities. You can stay in your labs and run ground controls. We have the experiments monitoring area that is a communications link to the payload operations comm network that you can follow the on-orbit activities with. When the mission is over and ready to return for landing, KSC has been noted as the program's lead for all launch and landing activities, regardless of where the landing may occur. So for example, for shuttle landings, of course, those are at KSC and at Dryden Flight Research Center. Our team is the one that sets up the facilities and prepares them for landing, whether they're at our local site or out at Dryden. We've outfitted a small complement of labs out there for any science processing that's required for post-flight shuttle return. And we're hoping to work with SpaceX on something similar for their returns off of the coast there at Hawthorne, California. Especially, we've also been talking with the cold storage team to work with them on how we're going to get their payloads recovered and get them into a stable lab environment before we can get that science shipped off for the final flight processing, whether it be in a local area there on the California coast, or perhaps shipping back to Kennedy Space Center to continue the laboratory processing there, or back to your customer site. As I mentioned, this is a generic process, but it's been tried and true for several years, and we hope to continue that in the future. There's so many entities that we've worked with over the future, and there's so many people here that have processed through KSC via the launch or landing. And so we're looking forward to continuing these partnerships into the next phase of the ISS research. Next slide, please. I mentioned that planning begins way long before arrival. Some of this pre-coordination that occurs is we have personnel we can assign as your personal customer advocate, a launch site support manager, who is going to work with you on identifying any ground support requirements. This is identifying if you need a lab, and if so, what facilities and commodities and consumables you may need that lab to be stocked with. We're going to help you identify the technical requirements for whatever process that may occur, and that actually will be me in particular, to identify any fluid servicing, or if you have time-critical requirements that need to be met, we're going to be there to identify those and to document those and work with the implementing organization or vehicle. Some of the items that you'll have to provide before arrival is a copy of customer procedures, just so we can go over those and make sure that they fit within our KSC safety guidelines. And as Teresa mentioned earlier, you have to work through the ground safety review panel prior to arrival and make sure everything's approved in that area. For logistics support, I mentioned earlier, we can help with whatever you need there, shipping and receiving, both in and out. If you need anything warehousing, just let us know and we can get those set up for you. I mentioned the labs that we can set up for you, and hopefully that's a continuation of your home lab as best as we can make it possible. And then there's also other tasks that may be performed by KSC personnel. Once you're done with your processing, you can turn it over to KSC personnel who can, we can help you with testing with the interfaces. If it's a small payload, if you're interfacing with rack level, we have some of that expertise. If it doesn't happen at KSC, then we have that expertise available to go elsewhere. For example, at Marshall, that has been mentioned. And also we can provide fluid servicing, and then especially for the larger unpressurized payloads that may fly on an ELC, we provide integration to that carrier and any final flight verification or interface testing that's required. Also, we do have experience in building experiment unique tooling or cabling. If for some reason you get down to Kennedy and you're processing and you realize that maybe a cable is clocked wrong, we have people that can help with that, or set up with any unique tooling that may be required for interface testing. Next slide, please. These are just kind of capturing some of the key launch site processing roles that we provide. The time-critical ground handling, like I mentioned, this is for late stow requirements for example, biological science experiments and early recovery of those. The technical integration, that again is working to identify the engineering requirements and criteria that have to be met either at KSC or for launch. And the customer advocacy is really our way to walk you through the process and make your processing at KSC as smooth as possible. And that includes the support requirements, identifying what you'll need and how to best make your stay at Kennedy as beneficial and as productive as we can make it for you. The next couple of slides call out more details of those particular areas, so we'll skip forward over those. We'll skip forward to page 9, please. And really to leave you with the fact that the KSC has all this expertise from all these years of launching shuttles and processing all the payloads, all the way from very small payloads to very large payloads and the elements that have launched on station. So we plan on using that expertise and building into the next phase, working with the SpaceX, the vehicle that's launching just across the river from us, and providing whatever help we can with any interface tests or verifications or other processing that's required. All right, my next slide, I'm going to transition more into telling you what's available at KSC. Next, please. Later this afternoon, you're going to hear from the Glenn Research and Marshall Space Flight Center representatives of what kind of facilities they have. So this is my opportunity to tell you what we have at KSC. And our goal really is to provide you with whatever ground services we can to enable the science success on orbit. Next slide. One of the two major facilities that we have for payload processing is a space station processing facility. It was built approximately 15 years ago, and all the U.S. elements that launched the station have processed through this building. The front half is an office building. The back half consists of a high bay and an intermediate bay, which just means the ceilings are a little bit different heights. But those are class 100,000 clean rooms, and we can provide several commodities, power, water, gaseous fluids, and that kind of stuff, and bridge cranes for lifting of the heavier payloads. Specialty areas in that building, we do have several labs available, both science and hardware labs. And we have control rooms that have been set up, and we use those for control room testing of either payloads or testing that's going on locally in the high bay, but we do have connectivity back to Marshall through to the HOSC to do the payload communications there. Next slide, please. This is kind of an eye chart. You'll have to study it more on the pitch that was given to you on the disc, but this is just a layout of the first floor. And just to show you, the area in blue there is all the high bay and the intermediate bay area. The PRCU, we do have one of the program units there, and it's located in close conjunction to both the I bay, where we can run cables from the PRCU systems out to the unpressurized payloads that are sitting out there in the I bay for processing. And we also can, it's also co-located with some of the labs there in green across the first area of the floor. And the area in red is CMC processing. Currently, this is where all the stowage is packed for loading into, for example, the MPLMs and to be launched on the shuttle too. Next slide, please. Some of the testing capabilities we have, I mentioned that we have one of the several payload rack checkout units. This provides ISS interface verification testings with all these different systems. It is the picture there shows you 3 panels where a rack can be rolled up and plugged into and tested. Like I said, we also have a panel that we can connect to a long cable that goes out to the larger unpressurized payloads that get processed out in the intermediate bay. We have experience in testing most of the racks, I think, that have launched from KSC, and several sub-rack payloads, the smaller payloads that go into there. And we've also began testing some of the sub-pallet payloads. For example, one of the experiments that has gone up a couple times is MISSI, which is the Materials ISS experiment. We're developing and finishing up an ELC simulator that will help once the final express logistics carrier launches in the next couple of flights. We're building a simulator to take its place so that we can do some interface and, if need be, verification testing at KSC for there. And then the fluid servicing that just tells you some of the items that we can help you with if your payload requires some of that servicing. We have this testing capabilities because KSC has historically been the final stop prior to launch. Now that's going to change a little bit with the end of the shuttle program, although we will have the SpaceX vehicle launching there. But we have a wealth of experience of testing that we can serve as consultants for other sites if necessary. And as I mentioned, we've tested all from small payloads up to the large elements, including multi-element testing at the same time, testing several different items running in parallel to see how everybody plays together in the sandbox. Next slide, please. For the labs that I mentioned, we have 7 science labs and 8 hardware labs and 2 central services. And these pictures show you a typical lab setup, and these can be configured as best as possible to your needs. We can move some of the equipment around as you need it. We have autoclaves and freezers in the central services area, and some of the other specialized equipment that's there listed, microscopes, biological safety cabinets. Again, we want to outfit these labs to best fit your science processing at KSC for your final flight preparations. Next slide, please. One of the other buildings on KSC, the operations and checkout building, that's the historical building where all the Apollo processing was done, and now has been destined for Orion processing, at least for the time being. But the facility that's still in that building is the baseline data collection facility. The Human Life Sciences program uses this to run the tests on the astronauts as soon as they come back, to gather all that data immediately upon return to Earth, and it's located very close to the crew quarters in that building, so it works very well there. And there's also a biomedical lab available for other instrumentation testing for human life science. Next slide, please. The other premier facility we have on KSC is one of the newest facilities, and David Reed of Bionetics mentioned this yesterday, the Space Life Sciences Lab. It is currently inside the gates, but there's plans to make it the cornerstone of a new exploration park that is being sponsored by Space Florida. And when that plan firms up a little bit more, they plan on moving the gates so it's going to be more accessible. So you won't have to have a KSC badge to get into this facility. It's very large. It's got several partnerships. Space Florida actually owns the building, but NASA KSC manages it and, with the help of our contractor, runs the operations and maintenance of it. We also have university partners, University of Florida and Florida Tech, for example, and it's a great facility for collaboration of research. It was built with research in mind, with several different lab capabilities and areas where teams can work together. Specialty areas in the building, especially are the animal care facility, a very large area of it, that provides animal husbandry and support for whatever needs that may be, either for pre-mission or post-mission processing, and several controlled environment labs that were also mentioned. Next slide, please. This page and the next page show a little bit more of the labs and the capabilities that are available there. We mentioned the controlled environment chambers, the animal care facility, some of the flight mission support labs that are shown here, the orbit environment simulators where, as we mentioned yesterday, we can pipe down the data from an orbit, what the environment is, either on the shuttle or the station, and then they can replicate that in the chamber so you can run your ground controls in a very similar or identical atmosphere. And next slide. And this, like I said, just shows a few more of the areas, showing a analytical chemistry lab and a microbiology lab. There's just several resources available in that building that hopefully is available to meet most, if not all, of your needs there. We've worked, like I said, with several of the implementation partners that are here, and several PIs have processed through there in the years past, and I think for the most part, we get a good rapport from all the people that have processed through there. There are other KSC labs available that I haven't listed in the pitch, but they're, in case there's material science labs needed, failure analysis, electrostatics, corrosion. I think some vibe testing can be done on site if necessary. And if that's required, just let us know and we'll research that for you and get you the information. Next slide. My final area is to touch a little bit more on the research development experience that KSC has. David Reed of Bionetics alluded to some of this yesterday. Next slide. This chart shows, of course, the whole total life cycle of research payload development, from early research announcements all the way through post-flight analysis and reporting. And KSC is actually recognized as one of the agency's experts in the plant research and associated hardware development. You heard from Dr. Howard Levine on the first day about the heritage of the plants in space. And David Reed yesterday of Bionetics told you about some of the hardware that they've developed and they maintain here at KSC for payload developers' use. And next slide. This is again some of the hardware that Dave told you about. The ABRS is now on orbit, two-chamber plant facility, and some of the other items which they actually had brought along, and hopefully you're able to see some of the samples they had in their display area. And the next slide, I think you saw yesterday too, the several flight payloads that they've worked on over the several years. And next slide, please. So through all these payloads that they've processed, they've gained quite a bit of life science expertise there at Kennedy Space Center. So like I said, we're hoping to build on that and continue into the future. And at this time, I'd just like to thank you for your time and just remind you that KSC is there for launch and landing and processing, but we also have lots of experience in other areas that we can help you with. So feel free to contact us and let us know how we can help in any way. Thank you.